Today we have a knowledge test. That's right, it's a questionnaire, it's a quiz about your knowledge related to Mythic Plus. You know when you go around talking about, oh, Mage has always been OP. Fire Mage is Blizzard's favorite spec, they always want to keep it meta every time, or perhaps something like melee DPS have dominated Mythic Plus, and all of these sweeping statements. Well, now your knowledge will be put to the test. We are going to be checking out your knowledge of Mythic Plus, starting from Legion, going up to BfA and Shadowlands, to see just how much you remember or just how much you believe is true and whether or not you are actually correct. So, for today, we have 205 maximum points up for grabs. I believe when I tested this and revised the total points for their answers, I got a 160. So, if you can at the very least get past 160, you gain bragging rights in the comments of my videos for knowing and remembering more than me about the seasons of Mythic Plus in WoW. Let's start first with the likely harder questions because they are back from Legion. We are talking about 6, even 7 years ago, so it might be harder to remember them. First in line, related to Legion, I want you to tell me the top 4 DPS specs in 7.2 of Legion. 7.2 is of course the Tomb of Sargeras patch. This is the very earliest set of data that we can go back and track and have available related to Legion Mythic Plus. You're getting 3 points per correct spec you are getting with this answer. Now, the correct specs for this answer are Fire Mage, Affliction, Warlock, Marksmanship, Hunter, and Balance Druid. So if you got all of them correct, you sweep up 12 points for this question. The question right after, still related to the Legion's 7.2, Legion's Tomb of Sargeras patch, is, okay, but what was the meta, the main number 1 healer of the patch? The answer for the top healer of this patch was Restoration Druid. That is the correct answer for Legion's 7.2. So that's another 5 points if you got also the top healer of this patch. Moving on to the patch 7.3, so we're talking about now Antorus, the last big patch of the season. Now I want you instead, for 5 points, I want you to tell me the top tank of the season. So we haven't mentioned the top tank of 7.2. The 7.3 top tank was Blood Death Knight. So that's 5 points for the top tank of the last patch of Legion. Now, for 20 points, the hardest of the questions about Legion, we have revealed the top DPS of the previous patch: Fire, Affliction, Balance, and Marksmanship. However, one of these fell off, one of these specs, I can help you, it was Fire Mage, and 2 new specs rose to being more popular at the end of this expansion. Which were the 2 top DPS specs which joined the others at the last season of Legion? I'm gonna give you a hint because this is quite a difficult question. It's not even Havoc. For 20 points, the 2 newly found meta melee specs of the last patch of Legion in Mythic Plus were Assassination and Fury Warrior. Those were the 2 specs growing in popularity in the last season of Legion. So with Legion done, you had a total maximum of 42 points you could have grabbed for Legion questions. Now we can move to something a bit more recent and also with a bit more data that we can scour through and test your knowledge about, which is BfA. Let's start with a rapid fire barrage of questions, increasingly growing in points rewarded, starting with what was the average key level in BfA Season 1 for 3 points. So the season starts, Mythic Plus opens. When you look at the top weekly keys, what was the average level of those keys? The average level of Season 1, that was the key hint, being the first season, the average level was plus 15. Now this is the hint in and of itself for the second question, which is worth 5 points. What was the average key level in BfA Season 2? So now we know the average level of Season 1 is a 15, and then in Season 2 we have the scaling down of the Mythic Plus keys, but we get better gear, we get stronger. So what's the average key level done in Season 2? The average was plus 18 key level. Now here comes the trick question. That's the hint for the question. It's a trick. What was the average key level of BfA's Season 3? For 10 points now. Because the trick of the question is that there is no change. The trick is that the average key level, this is the only season, by the way, of Mythic Plus where the average key level did not grow from one season to the next. It stayed at plus 18 even in Season 3 as an average. Last one, this time for 15 points to finish the Seasons of BfA in terms of Mythic Plus keys. What was the average key level for Season 4 of BfA's Mythic Plus keys in the top level of keys being completed? The average in Season 4 went from 18 to 21. So the 4 seasons of BfA were 15, 18, 18 and 21. Now we can move back to talking about specs and talking about the popular choices of BfA. The first one is only 5 points because it's actually quite simple. You should remember this even if you played scarcely throughout BfA, which was the most popular healer for 96% of the expansion. Not of the season, but of the entire expansion. There was just one clear winner throughout BfA. And for 5 points, the answer is Restoration Druid. Once more, they remained for almost the whole expansion the pick to go for as a healer. Now, the opposite this time around. This time around, we are not talking about the meta. We're not talking about the strongest. We are going into the weakest option. So, for 15 points, because it's also harder to remember, you're much more likely to remember the specs you saw in your groups, for example, rather than the ones you didn't, which were the 2 least popular tanks in BfA. Not just in a single season. If you were to make an aggregate, an average of the entire expansion, which were the 2 tanks you saw the least for 15 points total, I'm gonna give you 8 points if you only get one of these. And the answers are Vengeance Demon Hunter and Guardian Druid. So both of these correct net you 15 points as a prize. However, let's move away from tanks and healers. Let's go back to the juicy part of the DPS. Quick, very simple yes/no question for 5 points. Who was more popular? Beast Mastery or Marksmanship? Again, no season mentioned, no season required. In the entire expansion of Mythic Plus in BfA, which was the most popular? Hunter, of course, we're not even mentioning Survival. That's a rhetorical question. The answer for the 2 of the range specs of Hunter is Beast Mastery. For 5 points, Beast Mastery was the most popular of the Hunter specs in BfA. Moving on to another yes or no 5 points question. Who was more popular between Subtlety and Outlaw? This is much simpler to answer if you did play Mythic Plus in BfA in pretty much any season, especially 2, 3 and 4. The answer would be obvious. The answer is Outlaw. Outlaw was overwhelmingly popular in BfA as the best rogue spec. Now for 1 point, this might be a trick question, or maybe not. Don't get confused. Was Windwalker still a meme spec in BfA? Were they just ignored, very low play rate, nobody wanted them, or not? I hope you didn't get tricked by the trick question. The answer is yes, of course. Windwalker was still a meme, and there's your 1 point for guessing it correctly. After this, we move to another 5 point question, which is also quite simple to answer. Who was the 1 DPS that was the most popular this expansion? I mentioned Outlaw being overwhelmingly popular in the previous question, but this one was even higher than Outlaw. This one was even more. And then, yes, the question as the answer of Havoc Demon Hunter. Havoc was the number 1 overall more popular DPS throughout the expansion of BfA. We can then finish with a 10 point question. This one is about the meta in BfA, and the question is the worst season of BfA. The one that created the Exodia-like season with a very strict set of best specs to play around, the one that had the least amount of variety and options in the specs. Which season was that? You can even go randomly here because you only have 4 possible options, 1, 2, 3 or 4. in terms of seasons? The answer for your 10 points to the last question of our BfA expansion was Season 2. Season 2 was this strict when it came to the options as your picks in Mythic Plus, for high keys at the very least. After Legion and now after BfA, we are now left with Shadowlands. So now your memories should be even fresher. This is the one where you could be racking up the most points in this quiz for Mythic Plus knowledge, starting with the same thing we did for BfA, which is the average key level done in the top level of keys of the Season 1 of Shadowlands. The hint is that it's higher than BfA's. That's it. That's the hint of this question. For 5 points, the average key level in Season 1 of Shadowlands towards the high end of keys was plus 18. The second question, now still worth 5 points, because there is no trick here, this is not a trick question, which was the average key level of Season 2 of Shadowlands. The hint here is that there is no trick in this question, because the answer is plus 22. So you're going from 18 to 22 in Season 2. Then we move on to the 10 points of the question for the top average key level of keys being done in the Season 3 of Shadowlands. Once more, no trick question in here. So for 10 points, the average keys at the high level being done in the last season of Shadowlands was plus 25. That was a very smooth in terms of progression of keys throughout the expansion for Shadowlands, more so than what we saw in BfA. Now back to talking about specs or classes, another yes or no question. This one might be tricky, genuinely, to remember, even to those who actually played in Shadowlands. Who was the pick when it came to healers between Resto Shaman and Holy Paladin? If you had to make the average of who was more popular throughout the expansion, I'm sure you remember Resto Shaman with its damage, the totem, the earthquake elemental in Mythic Plus, as well as the Paladin with Ashen Hallow in Mythic Plus. So which one of the two actually was more popular? For 10 points, the answer to this healer question is actually Resto Shaman, more so than Holy Paladin. Holy Paladin was the pick in Season 1, but then progressively lost more and more compared to Resto Shaman. After the healer question, we move on to a tank question, back to 5 points, even though it might be quite tricky to remember. Was Guardian Druid at any point meta? Because you remember the Exodia of the end of Shadowlands, which was a Blood Death Knight, not a Guardian Druid. So was before that Guardian at any point actually good? The answer for 5 points is yes, they actually did end up being good and played, even in Shadowlands. After this, we are done with tanks. We move on to the DPS specs, and once more to a yes or no question, this one for 10 points, because it might also be tricky. Fire Mage or Frost Mage? Because Fire Mage was also meta as part of the Exodia comp. Together with Survival and Destro Warlock, you could also play with a Fire Mage, not more so with a Frost Mage. But what about the rest of the expansion throughout the whole of Shadowlands? Who was the most played? I hope you didn't second guess yourself. The answer was actually what you thought in the beginning. It was Fire Mage. For 10 points, Fire Mage was still in the end more popular. Now this one is only worth 2 points. I'm just checking just to be sure you still remember which was the season that coined this Exodia meta definition, which completely took over Mythic Plus with a very strict set of specs. When did this start? There is also the follow-up season which might be part of that, but there was a clear beginning of this meta. The clear beginning, of course, was Season 3. Yes, you had Season 4 with the fated version of it, but Season 3 was where this all began. So the question was quite simple. I'm gonna stay low at 2 points for guessing this one. The next question is a bit harder. It's a 10-point question about which was the best meta of the expansion. As in, you know, more variety, more options, more ways to move around the specs in the group. Obviously, even if you don't know, now that you have figured out that Season 3 and Season 4 had an Exodia meta with very strict specs, now it's basically a 50-50 between Season 1 and Season 2. So the correct answer for 10 points was Season 2 of Shadowlands. It was the most varied of the seasons for the expansion. Then we have another cumulative question for points, 3 points per correct answer to the question about the most popular classes of Mythic Plus, up to the first 4 popular classes. Again, it requires some thinking about classes perhaps with multiple roles, being able to get into Mythic Plus, for example, maybe classes that have always been popular or you feel like they have always been popular. Which ones were the majority of the population of Mythic Plus? The answer for the top 4 for 3 points each are Hunter, Druid, Mage, and Warlock. So funnily enough, not even that many hybrid classes, just Druid. The other 3 picks are pure DPS options. That's the answer for Shadowlands and actually for most of the other expansions, to be fair. Then we have another 5-pointer. This is a role-related question. Which was the most balanced role of the expansion of Mythic Plus? I'm talking about balanced, meaning the most options. The more variety in Mythic Plus in the meta to play multiple specs, one season to the next, or maybe multiple choices in the same season. The answer to this question is Tank. Despite Tank having the least amount of specs, the least amount of options, especially compared to DPS, it was actually the ones that rotated around the most in terms of possibilities in Mythic Plus. Then we have the last of the questions, this one worth 10 points to finish up Shadowlands. Destro and Survival were the meta choices, the meta options in Season 3 and Season 4. However, were there any other Warlocks or Hunters at any point in the expansion, not just Season 3 or Season 4, at any other point actually being meta in Mythic Plus? It could have been Survival again, Destro again, maybe Affliction, BM, Destro, Marksmanship. Was any of these specs at any point actually good in Shadowlands? The answer for 10 points is yes, and the spec in question was Marksmanship Hunter. That was the spec that ended up being meta for a period previous to Season 3. So now, with all of this, we are done with our trivia questions for the last 3 expansions of Mythic Plus. Now, all of this was worth 205 points in total. So, I would say for a cursory average knowledge of Mythic Plus, you should have been at least above 100 or so. And then the higher you go, the more knowledgeable, the more certifiably knowledgeable you are about the history of Mythic Plus in these past 3 expansions. We are, of course, leaving behind Dragonflight as it happened very recently, although I'm sure I could pick out some tricky questions about Season 1 maybe that some players might not remember, but we're gonna wait a bit more to come out with some Dragonflight questions. For now, these were the trivia questions related to Mythic Plus and your knowledge about Mythic Plus of the past 3 expansions. Let me guys know, of course, what was your total score when it came to these questions of knowledge and memory a little bit as well related to Mythic Plus. Besides this, I am going to leave you to the rest of your, I guess, reset day in EU as well on this Wednesday. We're starting as usual the goodbyes by thanking all of the patrons for the contribution and the help to the growth of the channel, which can, as usual, also be given completely for free. You can like and comment down below, as well as subscribe to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, yeah, the light was a bit too much. I forgot to tone it down until the end of this video. I should have done this a little bit earlier.